Comment below. Rate my story from 0 to 10 and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The sound of Italian loafers echoed across the polished marble of Central Park South when the widowed millionaire stopped abruptly. At 30 years old, he drew attention wherever he went. Dark hair perfectly combed, a chiseled jawline, and eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything around him. Beside him, his wife walked with difficulty, her prominent belly betraying 5 months of a twin pregnancy that had become the center of their lives. The fortune amassed through shrewd investments on Wall Street allowed the couple a life of unimaginable luxury. Their net worth in dollars grew exponentially each quarter, with diversified holdings ranging from gold to Bitcoin. But at that moment, all his wealth seemed insignificant compared to the fragility of the woman carrying his future heirs. That's when they saw her. A 4-year-old girl, so thin she looked barely 2, emerged from the crowd like a shadow. Her tattered clothes contrasted starkly with the elegant surroundings of the park, and her small hands trembled not only from the cold, but from evident hunger. What was most striking were her eyes, large, piercing, as if carrying a wisdom impossible for her age. The child approached the couple with hesitant steps, completely ignoring the disapproving glances of the well-dressed passers-by. When she was just a few feet away, she stopped and fixed her eyes on the pregnant woman's belly. 2 won't make it, the girl said in a firm voice that belied her fragile frame. The millionaire felt his blood run cold. His wife, a woman from a traditional family accustomed to the best medical care, turned pale instantly. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice betraying an irritation that masked a growing fear. The girl pointed directly at the belly. "There are 5. 2 of the little ones won't survive, but I can help." The park seemed to have stilled around them. The noise of traffic, the conversations of pedestrians, all became a distant murmur as the child's words echoed in the couple's minds. "How could you know that?" asked the wife, her voice trembling. "The doctors said there were only 3. A sad smile crossed the girl's dirty face. "The doctors don't see what I see, but I can make sure all 5 are okay. I just need a small amount to get what's needed." The millionaire, accustomed to negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, found himself completely thrown off balance. His rational mind rejected the absurd situation, but something in the child's certainty deeply disturbed him. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "Ridiculous or not," replied the girl, "in 3 days you'll go to the doctor. He'll confirm that there are 5 babies, and he'll say that 2 are in danger." The wife grabbed her husband's arm tightly. "What if she's right?" "She can't be," he said, but his voice sounded less sure. The girl came closer, extending one of her small, dirty hands. "10 dimes, that's all, and I guarantee that all your children will be born healthy." The amount was trivial for someone with his wealth, but the whole situation seemed straight out of a nightmare. The millionaire looked around, searching for someone responsible for the child, some rational explanation for the surreal scene. "Where are your parents?" he asked. "I don't have them anymore," the girl replied simply. "I only have my grandma who takes care of me. She's over there." She pointed to a nearby bench where an elderly woman was watching the scene from a distance. The elderly woman, realizing that she had been noticed, approached slowly. Her simple but clean clothes contrasted with the girl's condition, and in her eyes was a mixture of weariness and worry. "Forgive the little one," said the old woman in a soft voice. "She sometimes says things that frighten people." "They frighten because they're true," replied the girl, without taking her eyes off the pregnant woman's belly. The millionaire turned to the old woman. "Are you responsible for her?" "I've taken care of her for 2 years, since she was left alone," the woman replied, hesitant. "She's a good girl, but she has this gift that torments her." "Gift?" questioned the wife, her voice growing weaker. "She sees things that are going to happen." "She's never wrong," explained the old woman with sorrow. I've tried taking her to doctors, priests, anyone who could help, but no one understands." The girl moved even closer to the pregnant woman. "Can I touch?" she asked with a gentleness that belied her disheveled appearance. The wife looked at her husband, who nodded reluctantly. When the girl's small, cold hand touched her belly, she felt a shiver run through her entire body. "5 hearts beating," murmured the child, closing her eyes. "3 strong, 2 weak, but there's a way. There's always a way when we arrive in time." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of a siren. The millionaire felt his worldview being challenged by a situation that was completely beyond his control. All his experience in business, all his ability to think logically, seemed useless in the face of this hungry child who spoke with unsettling certainty. "How can you help?" he asked finally, his voice just a whisper. The girl opened her eyes and smiled for the first time, a smile that carried both hope and sadness. "I know someone who understands these things, but it has to be soon. Time waits for no one." At that moment, as the sun set over the great metropolis and the shadows stretched across the park, the millionaire made a decision that would change his life forever. 3 days later, the most expensive doctor's office in the metropolis became the stage for a devastating revelation. The millionaire held his wife's hand tightly as the specialist in high-risk pregnancies analyzed the results of the most detailed ultrasound that money could buy. "Well," said the doctor, adjusting his glasses with a grave expression, "we have a much more complex situation than we initially thought." The luxurious room, with its mahogany-paneled walls and framed golden diplomas, seemed to suffocate the couple as they awaited the words they already knew were coming. "There are 5 babies," continued the specialist, "and 2 of them show worrying signs of development. The situation is delicate but not impossible to manage." The silence that followed was deafening. The wife began to tremble uncontrollably, while the millionaire felt his rational world completely crumble. Each word of the doctor echoed in his mind as an echo of the mysterious girl's predictions. "How is this possible?" he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "The previous exams. Sometimes, in complex multiple pregnancies, some details only become visible with more advanced equipment," explained the doctor. "The important thing now is that we have a treatment plan." But the millionaire barely listened to the technical explanations. His mind was completely focused on the image of that hungry girl, her piercing eyes and her disconcerting certainty. How could a 4-year-old child know something that the best doctors in the city had missed? That night, in his mansion that had cost more dollars than many people would see in their lifetime, the couple couldn't sleep. The wife walked through the marble halls like a ghost, her hands always protecting her belly, while the millionaire locked himself in his office, trying to find a logical explanation for the inexplicable. His investments in stocks, Bitcoin and hedge funds seemed insignificant compared to the possibility of losing 2 of his children. All his wealth, all his capital accumulated over the years, were useless if he couldn't protect his family. That's when he made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, against all the protests of his wife and advisors, the millionaire returned to Central Park South. He found the girl in the same place, sitting next to the old woman, sharing a piece of bread that seemed to be their only meal of the day. "You came back," said the child, showing no surprise. "They confirmed it, didn't they?" The millionaire nodded slowly. "How did you know?" The girl shrugged, a gesture that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "I always know. It's a curse I've carried since I was very little." The old woman approached, her eyes reflecting years of worry. "Sir, the girl never lies. But she's also never asked anyone for money before. Something about your situation made her different." "Different how?" he asked, sitting on the bench next to them, completely ignoring the curious glances of passers-by who recognized his prominent figure from business articles. "She was restless for 3 nights straight after meeting you," explained the old woman. "She kept saying she needed to help, that this time she could make a difference." The girl raised her large, sad eyes. "I've seen too many families losing babies. I always knew what was going to happen, but I could never do anything. This time is different. This time I can really help." "How?" insisted the millionaire, his voice carrying a despair that he himself didn't recognize. "I know a lady. She lives across town in a place that people like you never go. She knows things about babies born with difficulties, things that doctors in fancy suits don't learn in books." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the millionaire's wife, who had followed her husband against his will. She approached the group with hesitant steps, her expensive clothes contrasting starkly with the simple surroundings of the park. "You're her," said the pregnant woman, her voice trembling. "The girl who knew about my babies." The child nodded. "And you're more scared today than you were 3 days ago." The observation hit home. The wife began to cry silently, all the emotions accumulated since the doctor's appointment finally overflowing. "Please," she begged, "if you really can help, do something. I can't lose my children." The girl stood up and approached the pregnant woman. "You won't lose them, but you have to trust me, even if it means doing things you don't understand." "Anything," replied the wife without hesitation. The millionaire watched the scene with a mixture of fascination and terror. His wife, a woman educated at the best schools, raised amidst luxury and sophistication, was begging for help from a hungry child in a public park. The irony of the situation did not go unnoticed, but not even his natural cynicism could diminish the urgency he felt. "What do you need from us?" he asked finally. "First, the 10 dimes I mentioned." "Not for me," said the girl quickly, seeing the old woman's expression. "To buy the things the special lady will need. Second, you're going to have to go to a place that will seem scary to people like you." "What place?" questioned the wife, wiping away her tears. "The projects across the river, where the fancy cars don't go, and where babies are born at home because they don't have money for the hospital." The millionaire felt a chill. All his investments, all his financial security, were built on a life shielded from the brutal reality that existed just a few miles from his mansion. "And if we go there, what happens?" he asked. "The lady who knows the secrets will teach the mother how to make the babies strong, but it has to be today. Every day that passes, it gets harder." The old woman touched the girl's shoulder gently. "Child, are you sure about this? These people live in a different world than ours." "That's why," replied the girl, her eyes shining with a fierce determination. "Sometimes different worlds need to meet for good things to happen." The millionaire looked at his wife, who nodded desperately. At that moment, all his fortune, all his assets and investments seemed useless compared to the simplicity of that child who offered hope when traditional medicine only offered uncertainties. "All right," he said, taking out his wallet and handing not 10 but 20 dimes to the girl. "Take us to this person." The girl took the money but immediately passed it to the old woman. "Keep it for her grandma. We'll need all of it." As they prepared to leave the park, the millionaire couldn't stop thinking about how his life had completely changed in less than a week. His wealth remained intact, his businesses thriving, but for the first time since he had accumulated his first fortune, money seemed completely irrelevant. The journey they were about to begin would take them to a world he had never imagined existed, and would forever change his understanding of what really mattered in life. The millionaire's limousine had never traveled those narrow, potholed streets. The contrast was brutal. On one side, his life of assets in gold and multi-million-dollar investments. On the other, a world where every penny represented the difference between eating or going hungry. The girl sitting next to the old woman watched out the window with familiarity, while the couple clung to each other with each jolt of the vehicle. "Stop here," said the child when they reached a corner where the limousine could no longer proceed due to the narrow streets. "From here on, we walk." The millionaire hesitated. That place represented everything he had spent his life avoiding: poverty, vulnerability, lack of control. But looking at his wife, who held her belly so carefully that she seemed to be carrying crystal. He knew there was no choice. The group followed the dirt alley, passing wooden and tin houses that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Barefoot children ran between the precarious structures, and women washed clothes in buckets outside their residences. The smell of simple food mixed with the odor of open sewers, creating an atmosphere that made the millionaire's wife cover her nose with a perfumed handkerchief. "It's here," announced the girl, stopping in front of a house that didn't differ much from the others, except for a small, cared-for garden in the front, where medicinal herbs grew in old cans reused as pots. A woman of about 60 opened the door before they even knocked. She was thin, with grey hair pulled back in a simple bun, but her eyes shone with a piercing intelligence that was strangely reminiscent of the girl's. "I was expecting you," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "The little one told me everything last night." The millionaire frowned. "Last night? But we only decided to come this morning." The woman smiled, a smile that carried decades of wisdom. "The little one has her ways of knowing things. Come in, come in. We have a lot to talk about." The interior of the house was simple but impeccably clean. Medicinal plants hung from the ceiling to dry, and makeshift shelves housed dozens of jars with herbs and preparations that exuded unfamiliar aromas. The millionaire's wife sat down on an old wooden chair, very different from the Italian furniture in her mansion, but at that moment any place that offered hope seemed palatable. "My name is Hope," said the woman, serving tea in mismatched cups. "And before you ask, yes, I know about the 5 babies. I know about the 2 who are struggling, and I know what can be done to help them." "How?" asked the millionaire, his voice laden with skepticism and despair in equal parts. "Because I've seen this situation dozens of times. Here in the community, we don't have the luxury of expensive hospitals and specialist doctors. We have to learn to solve things on our own," explained Hope, her skilled hands preparing a mixture of herbs. "And over 40 years of helping women have their babies, I've learned some tricks that medical books don't teach." The girl approached the pregnant woman. "Hope has already saved more than 300 babies that the doctors said wouldn't make it." 300, repeated the wife, incredulous. 312 to be exact, confirmed Hope, "and I haven't lost one in the last 15 years. The millionaire felt his worldview being constantly challenged. How was it possible that a simple woman, living in a humble house, possessed knowledge that the best specialists in the city did not? "What do you want from us?" he asked, getting straight to the point. "Nothing your money can buy," replied Hope, surprising him. "I want you to understand that saving these lives will require more than wealth and investments. It will require faith, patience, and a willingness to do things that may seem strange to people from your world." The elderly woman who cared for the girl spoke for the first time since they arrived. "Hope, they came all the way here. That already shows they're willing to try." "Trying isn't enough," replied Hope, fixing her gaze on the couple. "You're going to have to completely change the way you're handling this pregnancy. The expensive medications, the famous doctors, all that can continue, but you're going to have to include things that modern science doesn't yet understand." "What kind of things?" questioned the wife, her voice revealing a mixture of fear and curiosity. Hope got up and went to one of the shelves, removing several small jars. "First, we're going to prepare a treatment based on specific medicinal plants to strengthen the weakest babies. Second, you're going to have to completely change your diet and habits. Third, and most importantly, we're going to teach you techniques for emotional connection with the babies that are fundamental to their development." The millionaire laughed bitterly. "Emotional connection? That doesn't make scientific sense." "Many things that work don't make scientific sense," replied Hope calmly. "A mother's heart has more healing power than any medicine invented by man." The girl approached the millionaire. "Do you want to save your children, or do you want to be right about science?" The question hit home. All his intellectual arrogance, All his confidence in traditional methods crumbled before the brutal simplicity of that question. "I want to save my children," he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. "Then let's begin," said Hope, extending one of the jars to the wife. "This tea should be taken 3 times a day, always at the same time. The herbs will strengthen the babies from the inside out." As the woman explained the treatment, the millionaire watched the interaction with growing fascination. His wife, who had always been skeptical of anything that wasn't conventional medicine, was absorbing every word as if it were gospel. "And the money we brought?" he asked. "We'll use it to buy the rarest ingredients," replied Hope. "Some of these plants need to come from far away, and that costs money. But I don't charge anything for my knowledge. That's not for sale." The girl tugged at the millionaire's sleeve. "There's one thing Hope hasn't told you yet." "What?" he asked, crouching down to be at the child's height. "For the treatment to work completely, you're going to have to come back here every week. For 4 months. The impact of that revelation was immense. It meant 4 months of regular trips to that world he had spent his life avoiding. 4 months of contact with a reality that his investments in stocks and cryptocurrencies had been designed to keep him distant from. "Every week," repeated the wife. "The treatment needs to be closely monitored," explained Hope. "And you're going to need to learn techniques that can only be taught in person, with time and patience." At that moment, the millionaire understood that he wasn't just trying to save his children. He was embarking on a journey that would fundamentally change who he was as a person. His world of wealth and privilege was about to collide with a reality he had never imagined he would need to face. "Okay," he said finally, looking at his wife, who nodded with determination. "We'll do whatever it takes." The girl smiled for the second time since he had met her, and in that smile there was something that made the millionaire's heart clench. It was as if she knew something he didn't yet understand, something about the journey they were starting and about the changes that were to come. When they left Hope's house that afternoon, carrying a bag full of herbs and detailed instructions, the millionaire couldn't stop thinking that his life had taken a completely unexpected turn. And for the first time in many years, his money seemed to be the least important part of who he was. 4 months later, the transformation was evident not only in the wife's belly, which now housed 5 healthy babies, but in the millionaire himself. His weekly visits to the community had become something far beyond an alternative medical treatment. He had discovered a world where his Bitcoin fortune was worthless, where his millionaire income impressed no one, but where his presence as a person was genuinely appreciated. The girl had become a constant companion during these visits. Each week she was there, always next to the elderly woman, observing the progress of the treatment with her piercing eyes. But there had been something different about her in recent weeks, a restlessness she couldn't hide, as if she were keeping a heavy secret. On that December morning, when they arrived at Hope's house for what would probably be the last consultation before the birth, they found the healer with a worried expression they hadn't seen before. "The babies are perfect," she said, after carefully examining the wife. "All 5 of them strong and healthy. The treatment worked beyond my expectations." "Then why do you seem worried?" asked the millionaire, who had learned to read the subtle expressions of that extraordinary woman. Hope looked at the girl, who was sitting in the corner of the room, quieter than usual. "It's not me who's worried. It's our little seer here." All eyes turned to the child, who raised her large, sad eyes. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have said from the beginning." The millionaire's heart raced. After 4 months of successful treatment, renewed hopes, and a pregnancy that was progressing perfectly, the idea of a new revelation terrified him. "What is it, dear?" asked the wife in a soft voice. The girl took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I'm not a seer. I never have been." The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if the world had stopped spinning. The millionaire felt his legs weaken, and his wife turned pale instantly. "What do you mean you're not a seer?" he finally managed to articulate. I know about babies who aren't born well because it happened to me, said the girl, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I had 2 little twin brothers. My mother was pregnant with 3 babies, just like your wife was. The elderly woman approached and placed her hand on the child's shoulder. Tell them everything, my child. They deserve to know the truth. My mother didn't have money for good doctors, continued the girl, her voice trembling but determined. The doctors at the public hospital said that 2 of the babies were very weak and probably wouldn't survive. My mother cried so much. She paused, wiping away her tears with the torn sleeve of her shirt. Then my father started looking for help everywhere. That's how we found Hope. She taught my mother everything about medicinal plants, about how to strengthen the babies, about how to talk to them before they were born. The millionaire felt a lump in his throat. And did it work? Yes, replied the girl with a sad smile. My 2 little brothers were born strong and healthy. Hope saved them. But then why did you say you're not a seer? Asked the wife, confused. The girl looked directly at her. Because I don't see the future. I just learned to recognize the signs. During my brother's treatment, I became obsessed with understanding everything about babies who are born with difficulties. I read all the books I could find, memorized all the symptoms, learned to identify when a pregnancy is in danger. Hope smiled with pride. This girl is the most intelligent child I've ever met. At just 4 years old, she knows more about high-risk pregnancies than many trained doctors. You learned all this on your own? Asked the millionaire, incredulous. Not alone, replied the girl. Hope taught me a lot, and I spent 2 years observing all the pregnant women who came here for help. I learned to see the signs that doctors sometimes miss. The revelation was both devastating and impressive. The millionaire had spent 4 months believing in the supernatural, when in reality he had found something much more extraordinary. A traumatized child who had transformed her pain into wisdom, her suffering into a tool to save other families. But why didn't you tell us this from the beginning, he questioned. The girl lowered her eyes. Because nobody listens to a 4-year-old girl talking about medicine. But everyone stops to listen to a mysterious seer. The brutal sincerity of that confession hit the millionaire like a punch to the stomach. A child had manipulated his perception of the truth not out of malice, but out of necessity, because she knew that her real ability to help would only be taken seriously if it was packaged in mystery. And your brothers? Asked the wife softly. Where are they now? The girl's expression darkened. They and my parents died in a car accident when I was 2.5 years old. Hope and the grandma who takes care of me are all I have now. The elderly woman who had remained silent finally spoke. That's how I met her. A lost, traumatized child who only talked about saving babies. I thought it was her way of coping with the loss. And it was, said Hope, but it was also something more. She really has a gift. Not of seeing the future, but of understanding patterns that others can't see. It's an exceptional intelligence focused on a very specific area. The millionaire knelt before the girl, looking directly into her eyes. You saved my children. It doesn't matter if it was through mystical powers or medical knowledge. You saved 5 lives. 6? Corrected the girl timidly. How 6? Your wife's life was also in danger. A pregnancy with 5 babies without the right care could have killed her too. The realization hit the couple like a wave. Not only had they saved their children, they had saved themselves from a tragedy that could have completely destroyed their lives. There's one more thing, said the girl, hesitant. What? Asked the wife. I wanted to ask a favor. When your babies are born healthy, and they will be, could you think about adopting me? The request came so suddenly and vulnerably that the millionaire felt tears forming in his eyes. For 4 months he had observed that extraordinary child, had witnessed her intelligence, her compassion, her determination to save other families from the tragedy she had lived. "You want to be our daughter?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "I want to very much," replied the girl. "You're good people, and I promise I'll help take care of the babies. I know a lot about how to make them grow strong." The millionaire's wife began to cry, not from fear or anguish, as she had done so many times in recent months, but from a happiness she couldn't contain. "Of course, my daughter, of course." 6 months later, on a sunny morning, 5 healthy babies came into the world in one of the most expensive maternity hospitals in the city. But their first home wasn't the millionaire's mansion. It was a simple house in the community where they had been saved, surrounded by hope, by the elderly woman who had become grandmother to all, and by a 5-year-old girl who had finally found her family. The millionaire had learned that his true wealth wasn't in his investments in gold or stocks. It was in the family that had grown from 3 to 9 people, in a genius girl who had taught him that wisdom can come from the most unexpected places, and in the discovery that sometimes, to save those we love, we must first save ourselves from our own arrogance. Years later, when they told the story of how they met, the girl, now a brilliant young woman studying medicine, always ended by saying that she was never a seer. But everyone who heard the story knew that she was wrong about one thing. She had seen the future. She had seen a future where 5 babies grew up healthy, where a family expanded through love, and where her own pain transformed into the greatest gift she could give the world, the chance to prevent other families from experiencing the tragedy she had known. And in that future that she had seen and helped to build, there was no place for loneliness, fear, or despair. Only for the unconditional love of a family that had learned that the greatest miracles in life don't cost money. They cost courage, compassion, and the willingness to believe that a 4-year-old can sometimes be wiser than any adult.